Evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight, and welcome. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on unceded Coast Salish territory, and more volume. Just a few housekeeping things. If you could please turn off your cell phones. We are going to be recording the event, so we'd like to not have any interruptions. Okay. We've got quite a lot of events coming up, and we're actually just starting the environmental assessment process for Woodfibre LNG. So My Sea to Sky is starting to pull together information to share about how that environmental assessment process works and to help the general public engage in that process. So we'll be making sure to send out information on that. If you're not already part of our mailing list, please do sign up so that you can stay informed of everything that's going on. And right now, I'd just like to invite Linda up to the stage to welcome everybody. Is Linda here? Yeah? Oh, yeah.
From the village of Squamish.
Stand here.
Mike.
And I'm grateful to be here on this beautiful evening to open this very important community forum for you all. It's a scary matter that's near and dear to our hearts that we need to stand up and do what we can to stop it from going through. So my daughter Joyce is standing with me this evening, and what I'd like to do is offer a prayer and then a song, the greeting of the day, Squamish song. Hope. Since the hang, please Chelsea, Pasquale, Steve, Halton, Squallen, Eoin Finn, Steve. Great Creator, we give thanks for the beautiful day that you blessed us with. Sacred Mother Earth, we also give thanks to you for all of the blessings that you bestow upon us each and every day. Asking Chelsea, our Creator, and our Sequados, good grandmothers and good grandfathers of the Squamish, asking that you come and stand with your grandchildren. Lend us the strength, the knowledge, the love, the wisdom of all the things that we can do, and to always have faith in you, dear Lord, that the strength and the faith always come down from you and all the good things that you would have us do. Gentlemen told me for all the ones who are working very hard to keep our sacred Mother Earth healthy, so that we as human beings and all that live on sacred Mother Earth will survive, and keeping it well for our future generations. Gentlemen told me, Chelsea.
So thanks again, everybody, for coming out. We have volume, yay! So I'd like to introduce Kathy Heise, who is our expert for this evening. She's come all the way up from Vancouver Aquarium and has an extensive background in marine research and conservation. She's been involved in research on whales and dolphins since the mid-1980s. Over the years, she's worked to highlight anthropogenic noise as a critically important component of water quality and one that we have a responsibility to manage. So I'm going to let her talk to you all about that. Please welcome Kathy.
Thank you, Katie, and thank all of you for coming out tonight, and thank you for inviting me to come up here. It's really a pleasure to be here with you this evening. So what I'm going to be talking about is not exactly what the title is, but this is what it is advertised to be: Whales in an Ocean of Noise, Acoustic Impacts on Marine Animals. I'll be talking about, okay, can you hear me in the back okay? Okay. Okay, what I'll be doing is talking about how a primer on how sound works underwater, because it's different than in air. And I'll give you a sense of how some of the sounds that marine animals make and why they make them. And I'll describe some of the anthropogenic or man-made sources of sound, which are really noise to marine animals, and some of the things we can do to mitigate that. And if you have any questions, if there's something you're not clear on, put up your hand, feel free. So I got my background in marine research by graduating from University of Guelph in the early 80s, when there were no jobs for marine biologists. So we went out instead and worked on a lighthouse. And we were really fortunate, because being interested in marine biology, what better place and to be divers and see the life around you. But we were approached by John Ford, Graham Alice, and Mike Big, for any of you who are involved in killer whale research. Mike Big is really the grandfather of killer whale research on this coast. He was brilliant and had so much foresight in his use of photo identification to identify individual whales. Anyhow, they asked us if we would put an underwater microphone, which is called a hydrophone, at the lighthouse, and listen for the sounds of killer whales going by, which we were more than happy to do. After a number of years of doing that, we decided we wanted to get more actively involved in killer whale research, and I ended up going back to university to do some graduate work, and was using my own portable underwater microphone. And this is a hydrophone here that you can see just lowering over the side, and focused my research on killer whales and Pacific white-sided dolphins. And one of the real motivators for me coming to talk to you about noise tonight is just a sense of how marine animals can be impacted by sound. So what I'm going to play for you here is an example of some killer whales. It's quite a nice recording. You'll hear them calling back and forth. You'll also hear some echolocation, which is what they use to detect their prey. And that's that rapid click, 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 click sound. Too loud? It's okay. Loud for me. Anyhow, you're going to hear that whales are calling back and forth. These are the I-15s, for anyone who knows anything about killer whales. And then you're going to hear a boat come around the corner. Oh, that's too loud. Sorry, guys. Anyhow, you get the idea, okay? I'm just going to switch over now. That's called acoustic masking, when animals can't hear sounds. Okay, so you get the idea. Your own hearing was just masked by my recording. So I'll give you this, hopefully, quick primer on underwater sound. It's 16 slides, and most of them are fairly quick. So just hang in there with me. I know it's after dinner and everything, and sound isn't the same as sexy megavertebrate whales calling. When you look at this picture, you know exactly what's going on, right? There's sound wave traveling. This person is communicating. Likewise, you know what's going on here. You know that the person is receiving sound waves. So we talk about this, how sound travels in waves. And I'm going to play you a video.
When an object vibrates, it pushes the surrounding air molecules into one another, starting a chain reaction of collisions through the air. These collisions travel in waves. When they strike your eardrum, it vibrates. This vibration is converted into electrical signals that your brain recognizes as sound.
Now, when you saw that hammer striking the rod there, you saw that there were actually little particles in there as well. Just bear that in mind. We talk about sound traveling in waves, but for some marine life, we also talk about particle motion. And that's a very difficult topic I won't go into a lot of detail on, other than to tell you that, as you will see in future slides, it affects some animals. We're not affected by it, but some species are. So sound travels in waves, or cycles per second, or the term that we use is hertz, and it travels as particles, the particle motion. Our human hearing range is between 20 hertz and, from when the time we're very young, 20 kilohertz, which is 20,000 hertz. We also talk about whether a sound is low frequency or high frequency. The more waves they are per second, the higher the frequency. So at the bottom end of the piano, those are low frequency sounds. At the top end, those are high frequency sounds. Now I'm going to do a little hearing test on all of you. And this is really fun. I do this with school kids too, and it's really fun because basically our hearing is as good as it's going to be until we're about 10 years old. And the older you get, the more hearing loss you get, the more you listen to music with your iPod loud, or your iPad, or your iPhone, whatever, loud, the more damage you do to your hearing. So what I'd encourage you to do is, if you can hear the sounds that are being played, put your hand up, and then look around the room, and with the successive increase in frequencies, listen to see what you can hear. I apologize for the grammar in this start of this clip, but it is painful. Boy, you guys are pretty good. There's very few hands up in the room right now. I guess I don't need to continue, but you get the, oh my goodness, okay. Wow. You guys have been good. You've been protecting your ears. For the rest of you, eat more blueberries, because blueberries help the antioxidants. They're very good for you. No one can hear this one, can they?
I can hear that one, yeah.
You can hear that one?
Yeah.
Must be an artifact as well.
Yeah, there's something else in there.
Anyhow, what's important to know when we talk about sound is the lower the frequency, the farther the sound can travel. So in this particular graph, on the horizontal axis is distance from 0 to 1,000 kilometers. On the upright axis is how much that sound is lost, measured in decibels. And you can see a 100 hertz signal hardly loses any energy over 1,000 kilometers. Whereas at 1,000 hertz, which was the first tone I played for you, that sound level does drop off at 1,000 kilometers. At 20, or let's say 5,000 hertz, it drops off even faster. So that is attenuation.
Are you talking about in water or in air?
This particular figure is in water, but the same principle applies in air as well. When we talk about sounds, we also talk about whether a sound is narrowband or broadband. So I'll play you a killer whale whistle, which is a narrowband sound, followed by pile driving. And everyone could hear that, I'm assuming. Okay. So this is pile driving. Okay, it's fairly, it's quite broadband, and it's fairly irritating if any of you have ever had to be around it for any length of time. Now, we also talk about the amplitude or the loudness of a sound. So when you look at these sound waves traveling here, the bigger the wave, the more amplitude it has, more energy. And we use the logarithmic scale, it's a decibel, is the unit of measure. So in air, the very minimum threshold of our hearing is 0 decibels. A whisper at 1 meter, 20 decibels. And normal conversation, so my voice right now, if it wasn't amplified, would be about 60. It starts getting painful for us at 130 decibels, and jet engines can be very painful. So in the air world, for us humans, we've actually come up with noise exposure criteria. They've been in place roughly since the late 60s, and they haven't changed a lot over that time. But we can listen to 85 decibels in the workplace for 8 hours a day with no apparent hearing damage. You increase that to 15 decibels, and your exposure time is reduced to 15 minutes. So these scales are logarithmic. That means they increase in intensity very quickly. Just 3 decibels of increase in sound means you're doubling the intensity of that sound. A really important lesson, though, is that sound levels in air are not the same as sound levels in water. So if someone tells you that that ship over there produces 120 decibels, if you were in air, you would be concerned about it, but it's actually 149 decibels in water to be the equivalent measure. It's a 29 decibel difference. Anyone familiar with the Batholiths project? No, okay, I won't go into it. But there was a lot of, I'll just say that a lot of NGOs got involved during the Batholiths with the proposal for seismic surveys. And they were, as you advocate for the ocean, make sure you know what units are being used so that you advocate for sounds that are measured in water with appropriate units. And if any of you are thinking of doing that, I can talk with you more about that after. So light travels much more efficiently in air than sound does. And now in air, sound travels at 300 meters per second. And in air, light travels at 300 million meters per second. And we know this because everyone, when you see a lightning strike, or lightning fork, you see it and then you count the number of seconds, and it's about 1 kilometer for every 3 seconds. But the speed that sound travels at very much depends on the medium, and it's not as straightforward when you're looking at environmental impact work, because I just gave you the measurement of sound in air and water, but in sand, clay, sandstone, granite, limestone, look at those speeds. Sound travels much more efficiently in substrates like this or in steel than it does in water even. Okay, enough of that. You sort of got your quick primer, and we'll shift back to, okay, well, what about the animals, and how is sound important to them? So I referenced Mike Bake, who developed photo identification. We know each whale on the coast. For those of you, some of you might have gone to Tessa Denlanco's talk a little while ago, but I'm assuming most of you didn't. Hopefully you know there are 3 different types of killer whales on the coast, and they use sound differently. The most commonly seen killer whales for most people are the resident killer whales, and they're the fish-eating killer whales. And they use sound all the time. Like the clip I played for you earlier, they're actively calling back and forth to each other and echolocating. So they feed on fish, and they don't worry about making noise at all. One thing that I will show you here, we've got the northern and southern resident populations of killer whales. This is the area where they are ranging. But what's really great is that, at least for a portion of their critical habitat, it's been identified, and our government recognizes this, and the southern residents are an endangered population. This figure shows you their critical habitat. The government is required by law to protect that area, and it means to protect them from acoustic disturbance as well as other disturbances. Now, the critical habitat does not extend into house sound, but any vessel traffic coming into House Sound is presumably going to be passing through southern resident critical habitat as it goes out to market. Now, the second population of killer whales are the big whales. We're now naming, we've for many years called them transient. Mike Big came up with that name, but now we're trying to switch that name over to big whales in honor of Mike, but also recognizing that transient killer whales they're very regular in some ways. Yes, they travel through an area and you don't see them for long periods of time, but they do routes and travel much of the coast. And this is the range of in red, of the transient killer whales that we typically see here in BC. And what's special about them is they don't use sound actively, they use it passively. They have to listen for the sounds of their prey. They have to be able to hear a porpoise surfacing or a seal or a sea lion. So they are generally very difficult to detect with underwater microphones or hydrophones. So as a way of assessing their population, we can't rely on them calling. We actually have to go out and photo ID them and quantify numbers that way. But I'll just play you a sound. The only time when we get any good recordings of transient killer whales is after they've killed something. And then it's, in their world, it's, the table is set, they're eating, but I find it a very haunting sound. And the third population of killer whales that we have are what's known as the offshore killer whales. And we actually know very little about them, but they travel much like the resident killer whales. They're communicating back and forth, lots and lots of echolocation and calling. They range all the way from Western Alaska down to California. They travel incredible distances and they rarely come inside waters, once or twice a year, maybe. What's different about them is they prey on sharks. And if any of you have ever felt a shark, its skin's quite rough. Well, for the offshore killer whales, if one ever washes up ashore, we know right away. And that's because from preying on these sharks, their teeth are abraded. And they can be worn down almost, well, with older animals, completely down. So it's an interesting evolutionary strategy here of these separate niches that these three populations of killer whales occupy. So the group that I've probably spent on my own the most of the time working on are Pacific white-sided dolphins. How many of you here have seen them here? Yeah. Good number, okay. And I'll play a clip for you. We call these guys killer whales on helium. It's very frenetic, but you cannot be grumpy around these animals. Now, I'm actively involved in research at the aquarium on the dolphins there, but I've spent a lot of time studying them in the wild too. I can just tell you that this animal, we see a visual display. He's also making an acoustic, or it's making an acoustic display as well. This animal jumped up and down 17 times. That's the only way I could get that shot. Just kept pointing and hoping I'd get lucky. But the other animals in the group can hear those multiple slaps on the water. So again, think about how animals are using sound. So in the research that we do at the aquarium, what we're doing is we're actually blindfolding the dolphins with these eye cups. And these eye cups are made out of gelatin. I just put food coloring on them to make it more fun for me when I'm making them, because it's boring when you're making them all the time. But what we do is we get the dolphin acclimated to having the eye cup on. This is Laverne. And get her used to it, because dolphins aren't used to having things on them, so at first they're not too sure about it, but eventually we reach the point where we can put it over their eyes. And then we have hydrophones in the water and we're looking at their echolocation, and we're putting objects in the water while they're swimming around blindfolded to see how their echolocation may change. And one of the things that we do is, with the dolphins blindfolded, we actually ask them to retrieve objects. And so here you see Hannah, and you see the little ring that is just off of her beak there. I'm going to actually play for you a video clip showing you how exquisite their echolocation is, just how good they are at seeing underwater by using sound. So the trainer's just putting the eye cups on, and the ring have already been thrown into the water. There are 4 of them there. So you're going to, once the dolphin has both eye cups on, the trainer runs her finger up the dolphin's chin, and that's the signal to go retrieve a ring. So she's just about to give the signal here. Okay, off she goes. And she's actually scanning the water. She's got one. Okay, so if you think that was just lucky, I'm just going to play the second ring, and you can see her retrieve that as well. She cannot see a thing. They actually close their eyes before the eye cup goes on. She's just echolocating like crazy. There she goes. She's scanning back and forth, and she's found another one.
So what sort of frequency is she using?
That's one of the interesting things that we're finding is she adjusts her frequency. So they go up to at least 80 kilohertz, so quite high frequency. And they go down to, well, my equipment, I'm picking up probably 20 hertz. So it's quite a broadband sound. So just because I'm here, I thought I'd just focus on what I think. I think the herring story for house sound is wonderful, and I think the dolphin story for house sound is wonderful. There were no sightings of Pacific white-sided dolphins in house sound until 1995. For the whole 1990s, there were 2. Then, 2000s to 2010, 9. 2010, what are we at? 72, and the numbers keep growing. It's a really wonderful thing, and I'm really pleased to have them here, and I think that there's actually a resident population of dolphins that moves in and out of Howe Sound and up into Malaspina Strait and into the northern Salish Sea. I'll just make a plug here. I know there's some from the aquarium there, but if you happen to see any cetacean, any whale or dolphin, porpoise, we really appreciate getting sightings, and it's actually been a very useful tool for us to get information about changes in distribution and abundance. But that's not why I'm here, so I won't go into it too long. Now, we have also on the BC coast, Dall's porpoises and harbor porpoises. What's different about them? They use sound and they produce sound, but it's all very high frequency. We can't hear it. So I'm going to play you some of their echolocation. And it's been slowed down, and I'd like you to listen to how close those clicks are when you hear it. And think about, if your brain works that way, the signal processing speed that these animals must have in order to actually be able to get information from them. This is slowed down, I believe it's 10 times. So there's information in every single one of those clicks that porpoise is hearing. So it's amazing. So the large whales, the baleen whales, the whales that have no teeth, they also use sounds to communicate, but they don't echolocate actively. So minke whales, for those of you who've ever seen them, they have quite a low frequency sound, and I'm going to play it for you. It's been sped up in order for us to hear us, because we don't hear those lower frequencies very well. Kind of a weird sound, right? Killer whales make nice sounds. These ones are Another fantastic thing that's happening on the coast is we're seeing a return of humpback whales. Now they use sound to coordinate foraging. And so they forage by making these bubble nets, if any of you have ever seen that in documentaries, and they trap the fish inside this curtain of air. And the males sing on the breeding grounds, which many people have heard of, and that's in Hawaii typically, or Mexico. But what's very cool is that we're now getting males singing here in BC. There appears to be enough of the population staying here over the winter and calling and socializing. So I'll just play you a quick clip of them. is a male singing, and I think it was in February of a few years ago. So it's another low frequency sound. But what's kind of special about humpback whales and kind of neat about BC and Vancouver is that the very first whale watching industry in the world was right here, based out of Vancouver, and it was targeting a resident population of humpback whales. And they would take guests out from Vancouver Harbor out to Bowen Island and around there. And there was this was at winter time, they were resident, they were breeding here. So this return of humpback whales is really a reflection of we stopped whaling, we changed our behavior, the population is recovering. It's great. But what happened was in the commercial whaling was the whalers were always struggling in the winters about where to go. And some of you may have heard about them decimating gray whale population in the calving lagoons off Mexico. They actually came here. The Kate Steamship Company tried to block them. There are letters in the archives to the Minister of Fisheries asking him to not allow the whalers to come, but they did come, and in 3 weeks they wiped out the entire population of humpback whales that were resident here, and also wiped out the first whale watching industry. Okay, another species that we see here, also a low frequency specialist, are the gray whales. And the real low frequency specialists are the large whales like fin and blue whales. Historically, their sounds could travel hundreds, if not thousands of kilometers in the ocean. And they use that sound in reproduction to attract mates, to coordinate behaviors. So fish and invertebrates also produce sound, and they use it for all kinds of different reasons. There's thousands and thousands of species, but I thought I'd play you one of the sounds that we hear, which is snapping shrimp. If you put lower hydrophone in some bays, it's the sound that you hear more than anything else. So they're just snapping their claws together. But that sound has a purpose for them. Now there are tens and thousands of species of fish, and over 700 of them to produce sounds. There's probably more than that, they just haven't been studied. But it was very interesting to learn. A friend of mine was doing research on the anti-predator behavior of herring, and he was out at Banfield Marine Station. And if you've been out there, there's a giant cable pool that was filled with water at that time. And he was typically doing his research during the day. But he went into the building one night, and he could hear the herring making these sounds. And no one had ever, actually that's not true, someone had previously reported in the literature, but it wasn't in people's recent memory to know that herring actually use sound. And they use it as an anti-predator behavior, is what Ben Wilson speculates. They called this sound fast repetitive clicks, or farts for short, and he got the Nobel Prize in Science for this, but I'll just play you, and this is typical, it's not sped up, slowed down, anything. This is herring sounds, courtesy of Ben. So it's a squeaky, rusty kind of a sound, but anyhow, it's important to them. And this is a sort of an odd, scary-looking fish in a way. It's called a plain-fin midshipman. These are typically deeper water. They're found at 400 meters, but they come up into the intertidal to spawn. And Sarika Kala-Suzuki, who is David Suzuki's daughter, is actually just finishing her PhD on these guys, and she's looking at how they're impacted by noise. So unfortunately, I don't want to blow her big reveal of her results when she gets it, but I do want to make you aware, these fish make so much noise in a bay in San Francisco that residents were phoning the city trying to find out where the source of sound was coming from. It was irritating to the residents, and it was only at night. So quite amazing. And these fish, they're not that big, right? But what's part of what's neat about them is that the males are producing the sound to try and attract mates. And when they attract a mate, the male and female build a nest. This is a mating pair here with the female on top. You can barely see the male underneath. But then the male stays after the eggs are laid and the female goes off. Yes. I knew someone would get pleasure out of that little fact. And unfortunately, I'm not at liberty to show you this video, but the little fish then uses acoustics to chase off any potential predators on the egg. So it's sound, and there's a visual display he comes up, but he also makes a sound too. And I can say he in this case because it really is the male. So there's a hugely growing body of literature showing that some species of fish are sensitive to sound, and what the general thinking is that fish that have ears that link to the swim bladder are more sensitive. So codfishes are moderately sensitive, but highly sensitive species include carps, croakers, herring, shads, squirrelfish, and there are many others. But what we don't know is how eggs and larvae are impacted by sound. That's a fairly new area of research. There's some shows some species are vulnerable, almost like addling of eggs, and it's the particle motion that potentially could be the reason why. But that's a very new emerging field. Yes?
There was a diver not too long ago at the Fence Islands looking at herring eggs, and he encountered a huge sound from blasting, and he figures that that noise killed some of, if not all, of the herring eggs that he was witnessing.
Did he go back and look at the area afterwards?
Yeah.
It's this growing awareness. When we put sound into the water, we're having impacts. We don't always know from which species, what time of year, whatever, but it's...
Jack, you might remember, Kathy was asking me before, there's an anecdotal story that during the Olympics, there was a ship and a generator there right through the winter, and no herring eggs hatched.
That's right. Well, no herring eggs were deposited because of the noise of that boat that lasted all through the Olympics during the herring spawning season. So they didn't spawn at all.
Did they have lights on all night?
Yeah, I think so, but I don't know if they went into the water or not, but they had the ship motor going all the time.
That's very interesting. So the take-home message is that sound is an important sensory modality for many marine animals, if not all. They use it for communicating, navigating, detecting prey, and avoiding predators. So, I grew up in the 60s. This is one of my heroes, Jacques Cousteau, who really bestowed on people, he wanted to excite people about nature because people will protect what they love, but he kind of blew it on this one topic. He made a movie called The Silent World, and hopefully you now get from this, the oceans are actually far from silent. A lot of the animals he was filming were probably making noise. So human-caused noise, though, is another issue, and it's why I'm here today. Because ambient noise levels, so the background noise level, is increasing and has been increasing every decade since the 60s in the Pacific, and it's about 3 decibels per decade. So it's a doubling in intensity every decade, and it's largely the result of our activities. Now, admittedly, for anyone who wants to argue, in the 60s, the fish populations were better off, and there was certainly noise from fish, and with commercial fishing, the contribution of fish to the ambient soundscape has gone down. Now that humpback whales are returning, they will make an increased contribution to the soundscape, but a lot of this is our activities, and a lot of these activities produce low-frequency sound that travels large distances. So with shipping noise, basically, the larger the ship, the more noise they make. And this is just showing you the super tankers at the largest, the large tankers, and then on the bottom, you're seeing a fishing boat. So you were going all the way from 180, 190 dB down to 140. And they all produce sound at low frequencies, and actually their signal goes up even higher than 1,000 hertz. Part of the reason why we see this increase is that we have seen the number of ships, that large ships, increase, basically tripled since the 50s. And the amount of cargo that each ship carries has increased sixfold since the 50s. So the ships are bigger and carrying more cargo, and this is really what everyone generally agrees is the source of the biggest increase in noise. So what I'm going to show for you, it's a little bit of a complicated figure, but it's based on PhD work done by Megan McKenna. And what she did is she put a hydrophone in the water 3 kilometers from the shipping lane, and she just measured the sound as the ship passed by. And so the center point of each of these figures is the closest point of approach as the ship comes towards the hydrophone, and then you see the noise level, and the color gives you the intensity of that noise. So we're going from 0 to 1,000 hertz, and you can, obviously, the more red, the more noise there is. So container ships travel quickly at 20 knots, a bulk carrier at 13.5, and a products tanker typically at 13.5 knots. And this was all looked at in the Santa Barbara Channel. What she found, though, that 10% of all her ships that she got, we call these acoustic signatures, 10% of them had weird harmonics happening. And that is related to vessel maintenance. So if a ship is well tuned, it doesn't have all these banging and clangings at different frequencies, but that's sort of what you're seeing here. So 10% of the boats made extra noise that they shouldn't have been making. So she found that with commercial shipping, blue whale call ranges were reduced 90%. So these are the species are historically, evolutionarily, their calls were adapted to travel hundreds, if not thousands of kilometers. And certainly was interesting finding. And this work has also been replicated in modeling work by Chris Clark. So this is on the East Coast, but it's just showing you, this is the communication space of fin and blue whales in the red circle. So historically, that's how far their sounds would travel. And now you're looking at the little red dot in the right-hand image of how far their sounds travel today. Well, what's making all this noise? The biggest source of noise on a ship is cavitation of the ship's propeller. So if any of you operate boats, you probably know, you go and you're chugging along and then you speed up and all of a sudden you start making bubbles underwater. These bubbles are not air bubbles, it's like a expansion of the space that creates the bubble, and then the bubble collapses. So what you're seeing here is a streaming of bubbles off of a turning propeller. Any vessel that has a damaged propeller is going to make more noise in the water. And if there's fouling on the hull, whether there's nicks or bends in the prop, and so this is something any vessel owner can do something about. Also, any machinery that's on the boat, that sound transmits through the hull. And through the big ships that use bow thrusters and things, those are very noisy because they're operating at full capacity all the time. The faster you go, the more noise you make. And especially for those of you who operate small boats, the ones that go in and out of gear all the time, that makes a lot of noise underwater too. What is also mitigatable, though, is that these commercial vessels show a 40 decibel difference from one, container ship A versus container ship T versus container ship Z. There's a 40 decibel range in how much sound they do. And if 16% of the loudest vessels reduce their noise by just 6 dB, there'd be a 60% reduction in insonified space. So there's been some really great modeling work done here on the BC coast looking at, okay, what are the noisy areas on the coast? So in this figure, blue is the quieter areas and you go up into the red. And if you look at this was done in 2008 and Christine Airbay and her colleagues used AIS data, so automatic information system that many vessels have for transmitting their location. And so she mapped all the vessels and for different size classes, looked at how noisy they were, and came up with this map. And not surprisingly, Lower Vancouver Island is a very noisy area. What was surprising though as well is in Hecate Strait to the east of Haida. That's also very noisy. And the reason for that, Christine believes, is that even though there's fewer vessels going in and out of there, the characteristics of the water and the substrate, recall how I said that sound travels through limestone and things like that, but in shallow water it can bounce, so the sound gets trapped in that area. So I'm just going to play a quick video clip. This is a masking of killer whale calls that's been modeled. The ship's traveling faster than an airplane, obviously. This is the entrance to Kitimat, and this is the route that the tankers would travel. And so you're going to hear some killer whales and then some followed by the ship. Very quiet. Can people hear that in the back? Or you're asleep? Probably should have put it earlier. So now whales are now starting to hear the sound. Basically giving you a visual of what I played for you earlier, where the killer whale sounds were fast as the whale came around the corner. So what does all this noise do to animals? This chronic noise of shipping? Well, there's a lot of research that goes into it. A lot of people like to argue about does it have impacts or not, but unfortunately 9/11 gave us one of the greatest opportunities for what we call a natural experiment. So as you'll recall, during the 3 days after 9/11, there was no air traffic. Well, there was also very little commercial ship traffic at that time. So the ocean in the area around the Bay of Fundy, where people were studying North Atlantic right whales, was considerably quieter, 6 decibels quieter. What was the opportunity for the experiment was that prior to 9/11, during 9/11, and following 9/11, the researchers were collecting samples, stool samples from the whales. So that's sort of a non-invasive sampling method, and measuring the stress hormone in the whales. And just in that 3-day window, just those 3 days, there was a significant measurable decline in their stress hormones. What does that mean for the recovery of North Atlantic right whales? We don't know, but you can imagine we're trying to recover this population. It's another source of stress we're putting on them, and worthwhile thinking about in terms of how we impact them. Some other sources of sound that we put in the ocean are pile driving, which I played for you earlier, another construction noise. Dredging is very noisy underwater. Underwater explosions are really noisy, and one of the papers that I like to tell people about was there was some construction going on in Newfoundland many years ago now, but it was at a time when there were a lot of humpback whales in the area, and they were getting a higher rate of humpback whales getting caught, entangled in fishing nets. And 3 animals, at least, I'm not sure of the total number that were caught and died, but 3 of them were recovered and necropsied by a very famous bioacoustician, Darlene Ketton, and she looked at their ears and they all showed blunt force trauma. So that happens from being potentially too close to the explosion at the time. Now you have to wonder if there's construction going on, why are those whales there? Well, you have to look at the question, why were they there in the first place? They were probably foraging, and they were staying in the area because they wanted to eat. That's biologically, they're driven to eat when they need to. So pile driving is this source that I think we need to think a bit more about. They're driven into the ground, piles that you see putting in docks or for construction or what have you. They're typically driven in with impact hammers or vibratory hammers, and they They can be incredibly noisy and broadband. So what happens is the sound comes from the hammer striking the pile and pushing it down into the ground. But it also comes into waves that transmit into the ground and can, it's difficult to predict. It's very site specific how the sound waves will travel, but they bounce around and then they can come back up into the water and then back down again. So the largest piles are now being used in the wind farm industry. They're up to 7 meters in diameter, and there's talk of them going to 10. There's some good news on the pile driving story I'll get to, but the consequences for fish around pile driving are not good. They can cause ruptures and hemorrhaging, that sort of thing. And unless the species is of commercial concern, it's not a concern to fisheries. So we are at risk here of killing off species or injuring individuals, at least in the case of pile driving, if we're not careful about how we mitigate it. We also know that it displaces harbor porpoises up to 30 kilometers away, and they will leave the area. It's not unlike the humpback whales that stay even when it's noisy. The harbor porpoises are more sensitive to that kind of disturbance. Even though they're high frequency specialists in the sounds that they produce, the low frequency sounds from the piling are disturbing. So we don't have standards for pile driving in Canada. They're not national, they're just regionally applied. They're up to the each fisheries office, what proponents will be required to do. But a really great thing happened in Germany. They have national standards for pile driving there. And they said, okay, you are not allowed to produce more than 160 decibels of sound underwater for the installation of these piles. And wouldn't you know it, that regulation drove innovation, and Germany is now a leader in mitigation technologies for piling. It's a real lesson to us all. If a business or an industry wants something badly enough, they put their thinking caps on. So a bunch of different methods, and I'll just quickly say that air bubbles are because air, sound will not travel through the air bubbles as well. That's one common method, but there are many of them now. Seismic surveys are also a large source of noise in the ocean, and they are the predominant source of sound in the Atlantic Ocean. They're not in the Pacific and around our area because we don't have seismic surveys now, but if offshore oil and gas is ever developed, there'll be a lot of seismic surveying going on. And I'll just tell you the sound can penetrate up to 50 kilometers into the ocean floor and still return a signal back to the operators. What they're doing is they're towing an array of hydrophones, so they blast air from an air gun, and it bounces down, and the hydrophones pick up the sound energy that travels back up to the water surface. So it's a quick cartoon of it. And this is seismic surveys on the East Coast. You can see these are huge. They can be up to over a kilometer wide and several kilometers long. It's really amazing. This is just a map of some of the areas. It's an older map from 2009, but you can see how much seismic survey is going on. And we all know that the Arctic is now a target for development, and you can expect there'll be a lot more, well, there already is now seismic surveying going on there, and there will be more. What's challenging as a biologist is historically, people used behavior of animals as a cue to try and tell whether the animal was being impacted. But it's really difficult to interpret that, and I liken it to going to a concert. They're the twit teenagers, like I was, who go and sit right next to the speaker. God knows what I did to my ears. It's probably why I don't hear 15 kilohertz very well. But then there are others who swim away. So you can't really use behavior as a metric necessarily that you're having an impact on animals. But there's a really interesting bit of work done, and this was on a study done in Australia by a person named Rob Macaulay. What he did is he took a species of fish there called pink snapper. They're different than the ones here, but he put them in cages and they were down not very deep. I think it was around 20 meters. and he towed a very small 20 cubic inch air gun. He towed it from a skiff. So you saw the big ships, those air guns can be like 8,000 and more cubic inches. So it's a very small air gun. And he towed it over. He had a video camera looking at the fish in the cage while he towed it over. And he noticed that as the signal came close to the fish all startled. And then they settled down again, and he continued on. Then he did one more pass, but they didn't startle the second time. So what he did then is he kept the fish in the cages, and every 2 days he necropsied a subsample of those fish that were in the cages. And what you see here are the ears from fish that would normally be healthy on the left, and on the right, the ears of a fish that were exposed to this air gun. So all of the fish were effectively deafened by being exposed to this air gun. The reason why they survived is because they were in a cage. They were safe from predators. Can you imagine how well a deaf fish survives in the ocean? This was a paradigm shifting paper for me. When I read this, I was like, wow. There are alternatives to this technology, and again, this is being driven by regulation, and so companies are coming up with alternatives. So one of them is a marine vibricize. So some of you have also no doubt followed the stranding incidents that have occurred in different parts of the world using military sonars. These are they're relatively narrow band signals. We can have low, mid, and high frequency, but they're very powerful. And unfortunately, or for national security reasons, the US government hasn't been terribly forthcoming, and neither has the Canadian, about some of the details of these sonars. And there's legitimate reasons for that in some cases. But what is a concern is that it impacts animals by producing sounds, and we think with beaked whales that they may get the bends from this, being exposed to this. They're coming up to the surface too quickly. They've also been associated with mass stranding events of squid in the Mediterranean, and in the case of the squid, it's the statuses that are affected by it. There's an area in the Mediterranean now where they no longer allow military sonars, and since doing that, the number of beaked whale strandings has gone way down. So I'm going to play you a sound, but I'll do it really short because it's super irritating. But we had an incident here of the U.S. Navy ship Shoop, and now the operators on these ships are supposed to have marine mammal observers on board. If any of you have been around the southern Juan de Fuca area, Strait of Juan de Fuca, San Juan Islands, you would recognize that shape in the middle figure here as being a whale watching boat. It's pretty obvious, okay? And yet this ship passed by with its sonars firing fully, and this is a group of killer whales. Now, killer whales are normally very conservative. They don't go in BC. The resident population does not go into shallow water areas under normal circumstances. But when these whales were exposed to the sonar, they went into the beached area, and then they did, which was very unusual, and then the pod split, which was also unusual. They just took off. There were a number of porpoise strandings around this time as well, and there were minke whales breaching at the time too. And if you spend any time around minke whales, they don't usually breach in BC. Or, well, yeah. And so I'm going to play the sound. This is a mid-frequency sonar. So I'm cutting it short. It's awful. And I have research colleagues who've been up on the Central Coast and heard this sound, and they didn't know where the boat was, but it's such a powerful signal. They could hear it, and it was very painful. So are we mitigating adequately for this? Well, yeah. Anyhow, what we know about high energy noise is that it can disrupt behaviors, which is hard to interpret. It can mask communication signals and echolocation. It can block the ability of animals to just listen to their signals in their own environment. It can cause temporary and even permanent hearing loss, increase stress hormones and other physiological injuries. And it can cause physical injuries, as you saw with the fish, and mortality. What we don't seem to be able to address very well is what are the cumulative impacts of all the activities that we do. So here you're going to be assessing or looking at the assessment for the LNG plant. How does that relate to, there's also other proposals for other activities, the expansion of the coal port. These projects are all assessed separately. We never put them all together and think about what's that doing. There's a good news part of this story, though, in some cases. In British Columbia, the people are listening, and there are over 50 hydrophones in stations on the BC coast, and that number is about to increase again. And a number of these are actually live streamed. You can listen to them on your computer. And we have both academic researchers and government researchers. John Ford has a number of hydrophones specifically for hearing killer whales, detecting killer whales and fin whales. But we've got citizen scientist groups, and I'll just highlight one of them for you. This is a group called Cetacea Lab, and they're up at the entrance again to Kitimat. They live on Gill Island near Hartley Bay, and it's a very unique lifestyle that they have. They're there year-round, and they have a system of hydrophones for listening. And as a result of having all these hydrophones in the water, they're able to monitor for the presence of whales, and they're also able to monitor for the presence of ships. And that's the model that we're moving to in a number of places now. Saturna Island is about to install extremely good quality hydrophones that can actually be used to collect legally defendable data on noise of vessels or sources of sound in the environment. And this group is getting some of the same hydrophones, and we're going to see more of that. People are waking up. Yes, we know we're putting noise in the water. The Metlakatla people near Prince Rupert, they're getting a hydrophone as well. So it's really encouraging. You can also go to a website called listentothedeep.com, and they have, this is run by Michel Andre of the University of Calais, Spain, and he has he is able to live stream a number of hydrophones around the world. Now, not all hydrophones are working all the time, but I can tell you, I spent days in my office this winter listening to the humpback whales off Barclay Slope. They were calling all the time. It was phenomenal. So it's a really neat way to gain insight into the acoustic world of humpbacks, or whatever species, sperm whales. Now, in the Stellwagen Bank, which is off Boston, they actually have arrays of hydrophones, and they listen for North Atlantic right whales. And so what you see here is an image. You have the small dots; those are vocalizing North Atlantic right whales, and the larger circles with the yellow or red insert, those are ships that are transiting through the area. And I don't know if it'll work, but they can actually be used, the video will work, sometimes does, sometimes doesn't, but it can be used to warn ships of where the whales are so they can avoid ship strike.
Excuse me, how do you locate them? You put a hydrophone in the water.
You triangulate them. So there's a series of hydrophones, and that's how they can do it. So yeah, you need to have at least 3, preferably 4. So you can just see the ships moving through the habitat. It's amazing what modelers are doing. So change is really in the wind. It's coming. Maybe for some of the species it's not happening fast enough, but it is. A bunch of scientists got together at a meeting in 2009 and wrote a letter to Obama. And that was responded to by Jane Lubchenco at that time. And so now they're actually incorporating sound into their marine planning processes and in their sanctuaries. We're not there yet here in BC, but awareness is growing, which is good. The International Maritime Organization is now coming up with guidelines on ship noise production as well, and even some of the mandatory guidelines that they are designed to improve energy efficiency will also help make ships quieter. And I like to use Europe as a model of really being at the forefront. They don't have the incredible network of 50 hydrophones or more on the coast that we do here, and yet the EU has come up with what's called the European Union Marine Strategy Framework Directive, where they have set a cap level for underwater noise exposure over the course of a year. And that The goal is by 2020, they won't be putting more than 100 decibels of sound into the ocean with the cumulative all of the impact of all the activities that are going on. And then there are a number of other organizations now, UN General Assembly, the IWC, etc. They all recognize that underwater noise is an issue. And so that European Union criteria, 100 decibels, if you look on the figure in the right, this is modified from the figure in the left that I showed you earlier, the modeling by Christine Erbe, you can see where the areas highlighted in purple are where we're already exceeding that 100 decibel threshold right now. And this is based on 2008 when the economy wasn't doing as well as it is now, when there was less shipping. So we have no regulatory thresholds for underwater noise. And the only way we can invoke sort of protection is for SARA-listed species. If something is a threat to their acoustic habitat, and even that's a bit of a challenge. DFO, though, is drafting a framework to help evaluate projects and their noise impacts from shipping, and that's available as a CSAS document if any of you are biological consultants or following that sort of thing. And DFO also has what's called a Statement of Canadian Practice on Seismic, which is an ongoing living document that sets some guidelines for noise exposure. The other good news about this is that ocean noise isn't climate change. And there are solutions to this. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to ask any project that is being proposed that you have a good data on how much noise they're going to put into the ocean, and then you hold them to a very high standard for mitigation for the noise that they produce. And with that, if there's any questions, I'll take them. Okay, Nick?
What's the highest frequency that they use to communicate? Is it above 80 kilohertz?
Sorry, is it
the animals, the highest frequency they use to communicate, is it above 80 kilohertz?
It's very species specific. So porpoises, definitely, it's above. It can go up to 150. Whereas killer whales, it goes maybe up to 70, I think it is. And then you look at seals and sea lions or cod. For them, it's low frequency that they use, like below 1 kilohertz.
And the hydrophones, do you calibrate them for these frequencies?
Yeah, so that's what we're really moving in a great direction right now. These really good quality hydrophones that Cetacea Lab is getting and will go on Saturna Island. They're pretty much state of the art. They're some of the best hydrophones you can buy, and they are calibrated, they're time stamped, and they are, we call this flat. They're good from I think it's 2 hertz to 100 kilohertz. So you get a really good snapshot of what's going on there. And the reason why that's relevant, if you want information on fin whales, you've got to look at the low frequencies. If you want information on harbor porpoise, you have to look at the high frequency. These hydrophones can just sit in the water and collect data, and this researcher can say, okay, I'm interested in this, and then you just develop an algorithm so you can detect the high frequency clicks or whatever. So they're called I see this in hydrophones, but they're $20,000 a system, so it's a lot of money.
And how expensive is it to do the triangulation with the density and salinity of the water and that sort of thing?
How expensive?
For the speed of the location, for the speed of the wave. Is there a program for that, or is that just...
Those are adapted individually by individual researchers. So yeah, that part of it is new, but even just using 2 hydrophones and getting source levels on vessels, that's been done for quite some time now. And actually, there's a group, the Sailor Sea Hydrophone Network, Scott Beers. He's developed acoustic signatures for over 700 different commercial vessels on the coast. So
Can you use the mic again?
Sorry, okay. Do I need to repeat that, or hopefully not? I'll be louder. I'll tell you afterwards what. Okay. And yeah, there was a couple other hands there. Okay, the peace sign there, I can't see your face. But
Can you comment on how well sound transfers between different mediums, in particular, say a plane's flying in the air? How well does that the sound intensity transfer into the water?
Okay, so the question was, how well does sound travel from the air into the water? It definitely does, but it's impeded partly, and I'm not a physical oceanographer, but it's impeded partly by that air-water interface. But, you know, for example, I've been at the aquarium recording underwater the dolphin echolocation, and I can hear the float planes as they fly over. So, yeah. It's the sound that's produced in water or that bounces around with the substrate that's the largest concern, rather than the in-air transfer of sound, though. Yes?
Kathy, thanks very much. That's really informative. Could we take further advantage of your expertise and get some advice on what to do about the draft information requirements for this Woodfibre LNG? Have you looked at it? Is there something that you would recommend that we should be asking for? In other words, work that needs to be done?
Well, I haven't looked at it in detail, but I did look at the proposal for the St. Lawrence for the floating facility there. And for those of you, I hope you know, are aware, the floating facility that they want to put in there, they want to put it in critical habitat for the endangered population of St. Lawrence beluga. And it's you know, I don't often speak out loudly on an issue like this, but it makes no sense to me why you would do that. Now, what you would want to know is, what is the sound produced by these processing facilities? I saw no information on that in the Quebec proposal, and you would want to collect baseline data over at least a year for what the characteristics are of the area in the first place, and also have them supply information on what sounds will be associated with the ships that travel in and out, the support vessels, everything. So I didn't see that in the Quebec proposal at all. Is it there in the proposal here? Are they even at that stage yet? Okay, that's what Eoin can enlighten us about. So, sure. But no, it's you know, it's appalling. Well, I'll give you an example here. Different companies come in and do different levels of baseline assessment, and I'm not a active proponent for it, but I'll say there's a company called British Gas that's proposing to put a facility in Prince Rupert. They've gone out and done year-round observing and having hydrophones in the water. That's the kind of baseline you should be doing. So they've got people in boats looking around, and also they're listening. And these companies that come in and have a hydrophone in the water for a few days, or maybe a week here and a week there, that's not good enough, because you know those plainfin midshipmen, they only make that sound during the breeding season, and then the rest of the year you don't hear them.
When do they make that sound?
I believe it's in the spring. So, and they're here too. So Sarika did all of her work on plainfin midshipmen around Gabriola. Yes.
I've heard that there are alternatives of an installation of wood fiber, one a floating one on a barge and one on the land, and there would be different sound emanations from either.
Yeah, I mean, anything that if you've got a facility, a barge is just like a boat. You know, any sound that's produced on board is going to transfer through the hull. So there is some mitigation that can be done for that. You know, the vibration mounts and things like that you can insist on. But to me, it's up to the proponent to say, how loud is this land-based facility compared to how loud this floating facility would be? Yes?
It strikes me it'd be useful to have a plot of the sort of frequency range that ships give off versus the frequency range that different fish or mammals or whatever use, to see how those overlap.
Yeah.
As well as having enough of it.
I can give you a figure that's commonly used. I could probably even find it here, but it might take me a while. And where someone's done just that, and they've looked at the different source of anthropogenic noise versus the signals that marine animals make. And that is useful. I guess that the one caveat that I do have to tell you is the study that was done off California that compared the container ships and the tankers and bulk carriers. they were using hydrophones that only recorded to 1 kilohertz. So what we need to do is get acoustic signatures up above that. And just for those of you that power around in speedboats, you're making noise too. It's just that those speedboats, when they're going along at full throttle, tend to have high frequency noise is the dominant frequency. So I do have frequency spectra for an actual ship, so you could see where the power is. I have that as well. If you want to come after and give me a list of what you want, I can send it.
And can that be overlapped then on the frequency range that different species are using?
Yeah, you know, so, but this is where this is my own personal opinion. It becomes overwhelming as a biologist to figure out, okay, how are we impacting this species and that species and this species and that species? My approach at this point in time, and is one that was an idea that was developed by Les Barrett-Leonard, who's at the aquarium, is rather than try and guess how animals are going to be impacted, let's just set a limit. So for example, for the port of Vancouver that's going to do all this expansion, let's just say you can't increase the noise any more than what it is right now. So if you want to do this big expansion, you've got to be quieter if you're going to have more ships coming in. You've got to figure out a way. And again, this is like the Germany example. Guidelines or regulations will drive innovation and they'll make it quieter. So one important little factoid I should tell you, there's only one acoustic signature for an LNG tanker that I'm aware of, but they are as noisy as super tankers. So, but no, it was one done off on the East Coast. So.
But that you showed depends on speed, right?
Yes.
So if you can get them to slow down, there's a lot less.
Yes, but particularly with LNG, there's pressure on them to go fast to maintain product, right? So there's some trade-offs there.
And then it's also very narrow here, right?
So you can have reverberation and things like that. But I will say, for many of these larger ships, cavitation starts at around 8 to 10 knots. If below 8 knots, typically they're quieter because they're not cavitating.
Well, two things. One is that as of very recently, Woodfibre has committed to having the facility on land because they can't do it any other way. That's the reality. So that's good news because we won't have noise traveling from the liquefaction plant on the barge into the water. However, we will have the LNG, if it happens, the LNG carriers coming in once a month or less, hopefully, and they take once a week, sorry. And they take 24 hours to load, and they'll be running their engines during that time. So, just as you have been asking, I mean, who is going to be affected the most? Are they all going to be are they all going to run away? Is everyone going to run away, including herring, from regular 24-hour ship running?
Well, you know, there's a challenge there, and it's sort of like the southern resident killer whales. Do they run away because of all the noise we're putting in this area? Well, if there's fish around, they don't. But their calling has changed. It's gotten louder than previously. So there are impacts that way. We don't know if they're less able to find fish because they can't hear that echolocation because it's masked more. You know, I'd say you have a population that's not recovering. You need to think about all of the potential impacts that you have. So the herring may still come, but they may be more stressed, or they may not come. You know.
Is there any definitive source of information that one could quote to do with the herring, because they're the basis of the food chain. Everything eats them, and if they get scared away, then it doesn't really matter how the other marine mammals are affected, because there won't be food for them.
Yeah, I wished I could say that there was, but as far as I know, and I'd have to think, and I admit I don't think well late in the day. The last conference I went at, I don't think there was anybody working on herring specifically. But again, that's research that should be done.
It is, and with our provincial government, I don't think it would be very easy to just say, let's settle the noise level at such and such with their determination.
No, but you know, one thing, the Port of Metro Vancouver is being fairly proactive on is at least engaging in these kind of conversations. And there's a program called the Green Marine program. It's a green certification for ports and vessels, that sort of thing. And they have standards for emissions and things like that. And it's an incentive program. So if you follow the Green Marine's criteria, you can get benefits like reduced berthage fees, or you might get quicker access to unloading, things like that. So it's incentivizing changes in behavior. We're not there yet with the noise issue, but we're working, that's definitely on my agenda. I do want to tell you, one of the largest sources of noise around Vancouver, which I know isn't relative to you, but it's something you should think about, is BC ferries. And it's these large ships that BC ferries have what's called a variable rate propellers, which are great because they can be more efficient. But what they have is variable rate propellers on a shaft that turns at a fixed speed. So it means that the vessel, when it's sitting at the dock, the engine is running the whole time, even though the propellers the blades are angled in such a way so it's not moving forward, but the shaft and the engine just keeps turning, and that just puts noise right into the ocean, and they're very noisy. So as we increase awareness about this, we can hold industries, whatever, more accountable.
BC Ferries is putting out tenders for new ferries.
I'm aware of that.
Way we can pressure them to do something about that? Because I have an aluminum boat, and you would not believe the amount of noise from those remnants, those Spirit class ferries, whatever they're called.
Yes.
I could hear them coming like a kilometer away.
Yes, so that's why I'm here talking to people. When you hear about these developments and they're having something to do with the ocean, think about what the noise is that's being produced.
Another question, if you had a tanker being pulled by a much smaller tug, would you expect the volume level to be more comparable to that of the smaller tug or the bigger tanker?
Tugs can be very noisy as well. With any, if the tug engine is running at full speed, so it's working at maximum capacity, it's very noisy. So actually one of the ways that they're trying to reduce noise in the offshore oil in the States is by engineering things so that things are actually overbuilt, so that the tug doesn't have to work at full capacity, that the bow thrusters don't have to work at full capacity. So that's the sort of thing. It really depends on the situation. So.
There's one back here.
Okay.
In regards to having an onshore facility, are there any studies that you know of that link or that have looked at the propagation of sound from heavy industrial machinery on land into the water? And what proximity, is there like a setback that should be?
Yeah, it's substrate and project specific. And it also, it's yes, if there is a development right on near the water, the sound will propagate through the ground and then into the ocean. Absolutely. The way that it does has to be assessed on an individual basis because sound moves differently through different substrates, and it depends what the source is. Are there individual studies? Not that I can think of right now, but I could probably. If you remind me or send me an email, I could put you in that direction. I could try to.
Okay, thanks. And also, is there like a vibration isolation strategy that could be implemented?
That's exactly it. So it's the mounts. Absolutely. And that's what they're doing with they're recommending now with commercial shipbuilding. It's even things like using electric motors rather than diesel engines and things like that. So.
Thank you.
I've got a question right here. Sure.
My name is Bob Baker from the Squamish Nation. Way back when they had this chemical just across from where I live in Squamish, and we didn't do anything about it, but there was a few young boys we were working on a boom ground. A couple of them down there died there because the chemical was just coming in strong. But we don't want to have that again. This thing here that's happening now, it's who's gonna get hurt? We'll all get hurt. We're trying to to look after ourselves, this valley. I grew up here, right in here, just down the river here. And Pat Brennan was the mayor at that time. And he says, that's the worst thing I've ever done. It's okay, something like that to happen to the Squamish shore there. And he couldn't change it. So right now is the time that we gotta have a big say on this. No, we're talking about species, and we're the one that's gonna go.
Maybe that would be a good thing.
Yeah. No,
I meant that in joke, sorry.
that's a good target. Anyways, I worked on the boom ground down just in the waterfront, and the herring was just packed when it came in. There was herring all over there. And that mill was another one that killed all the herring. When they started using that chemicals to put over the lumber. And that spring there when I was working down there, I think it was about 1.5 foot thick of dead herring all the way up. And we're talking about herring that won't come back because of the sound. This is a different thing in here. I was a herring fisherman, a commercial fish. 40 years I was up there. And once you dump a herring, the fish will never come back. Never come back to this certain place. So we have to deliver all our herring. We have to give it away. So this is what another thing that's happening. You know, I don't. When I was living on the coast, and I slept on a boat all the time, you can hear the propellers going by all night when the boats go by, different sounds, and didn't bother us at that time because we didn't know better what was going on. We never heard about these sounds. There was thousands of killer whales going by that I was on the Johnson Straits way up top end of Vancouver Island, and there were thousands of blackfish going through. They call it blackfishes, killer whales, and those other kind of whales. And I seen them whalers come in. It took them 1 week to kill all the whales right where we were. I couldn't believe it myself because they tied them all together just like they were logs. There were six across, and they had to tow them all the way up to the whaling station. And I seen that happen. I seen a lot of things happen on the coast. Now what happened in the government, it didn't help nobody. See, this is what I'm worried about here. Is the government going to stop this, or what's happening? We're talking about the one up in Kitimat here. It's going to kill the whole coast. Once it kills all that fish, there'll be no more. Once that fish dies on the ocean's going to turn dirty. The fish is the one that keep all the oceans clean. They live off the ocean. Anything that's wrong is cleaned up. And I see that because I see that's going to happen. But I'm really thinking about our own self here, and that doesn't matter what they do. I don't want to see it come through our territory here. But something like that that's dirty. We didn't want them there, the pulp mill. We fought that for a long time. And then when they got rid of them, we thought we were free, that all the fish were coming back and everything was coming back. Now what's going to happen? We'd rather say goodbye to it all. I do have a lot of say we're going to have another meeting somewhere, and I think we're going to have one down our tournament hall. There's a lot of people there, because I wanted to see our leaders here tonight, to listen to what you have to say here. And I'm just going to pass it on what I heard today. Thank you.
Get back on track here. If everybody could please take a seat. Eoin's going to be presenting all of his research that he's been doing on LNG. As I said earlier, My Sea to Sky has a lot of volunteers working for us right now, and Eoin is part of the research team, and we're working really hard to pull together as much information as we can about why you should be concerned about this LNG project. I'd also like to really thank the Brackendale Art Gallery for allowing us to host this event here tonight. And I'd like to thank the events team, the My Sea to Sky events team, who are putting so much effort into organizing these kinds of events. We have several events coming up. Save House Sound is organizing a fundraising event on the 21st of June. It's music and it's on the solstice. So come out and dance. I believe that's at the Cliffside Pub. Next week is really important because Woodfibre LNG has all of their open houses starting, and they're happening at the Executive Suites Hotel from 1 to 3 on Monday and then 5 to 8, and then also on Wednesday from 1 to 3 and 5 to 8. The most important one to go to is the Wednesday meeting, because that is the only official open house that is actually part of the environmental assessment process. So please make sure you come out on Wednesday. I think it's from 5 until 8 p.m. at the Executive Suites Hotel to be a part of that. And then in 2 weeks' time, so the 27th of June, we have another information session like this. We have Damien Gillis, who is a filmmaker and documentary maker. He's doing a documentary called Fractured Land. He will be speaking at Totem Hall. And Eoin Madden from the Wilderness Committee will also be speaking at Totem Hall. So that's the 27th of June. And then another event is the 29th of June. We are actually filming a documentary. Les McDonald is, and actually I believe Paul as well is helping out, is filming your stories, what you think about this project, what you know about Squamish and Squamish's history, or anything that you want to actually say. We're having it's a chance for people to get together and spend some time, get to know your neighbors, get to know your neighbors in other communities in the Sound, have a potluck, and then share your story and get that captured on film. So that's going to be lots of fun. That's the 29th of June. So without any further ado, I'm going to reintroduce Eoin and let him tell you all about what he's been researching.
Here, I'll stand here. So probably be easier. Be out of your way. I recognize some faces that from a couple of nights ago when I gave the same talk, or much the same talk, down in Squamish. And bear with us here if I go at the same speed as if you hadn't. So without further ado, I'm Eoin Finn. I live on Boyer Island during the summer, and all of you people know that where Boyer is. Some people in Vancouver don't know where Boyer is, but it's that haystack-shaped island just off Sunset Marina, south of Anvil. And I rather like it there. So the reason I've totally fallen in love with Howe Sound, it's the return of the dolphins and the orcas in the last few years have been wonderful. I would say that I have two daughters who are both marine biologists who grew up on Boyer Island, and they are particularly driving me to do what I'm doing. So I've got a few degrees. Sometimes people say I have more than your average thermometer, but all of that has, back in 2008, there was a proposed LNG plant. It was going to import LNG in those days at Texela Island. And the Union of BC Municipalities and Powell River was particularly concerned because of the pollution that went with it, particularly air pollution, and the fact they didn't much care for the foreigners and their attitudes that came with it. They passed a motion at the Union of BC Municipalities saying, we want to ban LNG tankers from all those places at the bottom, Malaspina, Georgia, Juan de Fuca, and Ara Straits, and Boundary Pass. And that is still in effect from every single municipality in this province. It has never been revoked, and I've been going around to all the municipal councils and reminding them that this is still in effect, and if they would please write to the Prime Minister, and some of them have. In Lions Bay, they've gone further and passed another motion, much like this, and written the letter to Stephen Harper. I might add that about the same time this was going on in the West Coast, on the East Coast, there was a proposal to put an LNG plant on the border between Maine and New Brunswick. And in order to get the LNG tankers in and out, they had to pass through Canadian waters. So push led to shove, and the Prime Minister stood up in Parliament and declared that he would never allow anything as hazardous as an LNG tanker through Canadian waters. That Prime Minister was none other than Stephen Harper. This is a busy strait. You've seen some pictures tonight from Kathy. This is a snapshot that is an active website. It's the marinetraffic.com. And you can go there at any particular moment and take a snapshot if you've got an iPhone or one of these things. And it'll tell you where all the vessels are. The blue ones are either tugs or ferries. The red ones, like that one, is a tanker coming either from down here at the Anacortes oil terminal or all the way from Vancouver, the Burnaby, Kinder Morgan thing, and down through here. The key point of where all these vessels have to go through a very narrow constriction is the Harrow Strait right here, where they have to make a sharp right and then a sharp left. It's a very constricted area, and it's right at the south end of Saturna, where Kathy says we're going to put a bunch of hydrophones. So this traffic is policed by two international, well, the Canadian and the US Coast Guard, and so far there haven't been a whole pile of collisions, but we're about to add hugely to the whole traffic going through there, particularly dangerous traffic like LNG tankers. And there, as you know, there's a proposal by Kinder Morgan to put a great increase in oil tankers if they get this pipeline built to Vancouver, and try to turn Vancouver into some black fossil pit. We'll go from 60 tankers a year to 408. That's a big increase in the number of tankers, all going out through that narrow Harrow Strait. The ones coming from Woodfibre would come down through Howe Sound and then out and down that path to the Pacific. And of course, the empty ones come back. Coal carriers from the Delta Port expansion, which is troubling to the people in Texada Island and all through the Lower Fraser, would increase by about 100 different cargo shipments a year. There's a great big project, the Gateway Pacific project for Cherry Point in Washington, and I know the relationships that exist amongst First Nations between North and South in Washington, the Tsleil-Waututh, your cousins, and Musqueam do have great relations between them and have decided that this is not a good idea. That's about a 300% increase in traffic, and every time ships pass each other, particularly in windy or foggy conditions, the chances that some of them are going to whack into each other are pretty high and getting higher. The background for this thing is actually an LNG tanker that whacked a container ship off Singapore a couple of months ago. And the fortunate thing is they were both going in the same direction, which tells you a lot about how much attention they pay. This was lucky, it just damaged the front of it. Anyway, a recent study in Washington State said that with all this increased traffic, you stand about a 5 times extra chance of having a spill. They didn't factor in these LNG tankers, about a 5 times increase in LNG in collision risk. And then particularly in that Harrow Strait, where there's an intersection between the US traffic and the Canadian traffic. I might add that there is another LNG proposal just beside the Woodfibre one up at Campbell River, just north of Campbell River, where U.S. companies bought the old Elf Falls site. And there is a gas pipeline to there. They have a proposal in to put another LNG plant, which would involve tankers, LNG tankers coming down past Nanaimo and then joining up with the Vancouver traffic. A lot of government, let's call it what it is, propaganda says you can't set fire to LNG. It won't burn, it'll just disappear in the air, somewhat like pixie dust. And it does not. Back in 9/11, when 9/11 tragedy happened, Boston Harbor has an import LNG terminal. They banned tankers from entering their harbor because they were very afraid of terrorism, and God knows we have some of those in this country. And they did a study by the US government, Vice President Joe Biden chaired it, that said, what would happen if you put a hole in one of these things? And it turns out that you get a plume of this gas, which, because it's very, very cold and it mixes with the water vapor off the ocean, it actually forms a very dense and very heavy fog. It's heavier than air. Methane itself is not, but this mix of fog basically is. And it spreads where the wind blows it. And the first time it hits an idling engine on your boat, somebody's smoking, somebody's stove, any ignition source, it's going to burn, and it burns at 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Each of these ships, if it comes in, if that project is built, each of these ships will have 60,000 tons of LNG aboard it. You can't put that fire out if it starts. Much like the Lac-Mégantic tragedy where they had to wait for it to stop burning. They could not put it out. You're going to have these ships who come in and out anchored or tethered to a storage tanker that's got 120,000 tons in it, and transferring it ship to ship. And those of you who have fished in the Sound know that it gets quite windy, and these ships will rock against each other, and the little transfer accordion that goes between them will be very stretched, particularly at minus 160 degrees where steel doesn't perform bending too well. So spills occur there, and those are fairly lethal. And if one of these things caught fire in Howe Sound, the resulting forest fire up at back of Woodfibre would be pretty serious, depending on time of year that it actually caught. So they're dangerous things. This is a picture. It doesn't show very well, but it says that if one of these things catch fire and that plume goes out, 50% of the people within 3.7 kilometers will not survive. The kill zone is that wide. By the time you get out to 4 or 5 kilometers, the nice thing is it's down to 1%. And it's mainly from burns, first, second, and third degree burns. Each of these tankers is going to have an exclusion zone around it. So if you have a fishing vessel and this thing decides to pull out, you have to stay 1.6, according to international standards, 1.6 kilometers away from it. Now that 1.6 kilometers is represented by these circles here. And there are various points where the distance between the shore, like South End of Bowen and Horseshoe Bay, Boyer, where my home is, and the Hood Point, particularly the shortest distances there is between Anvil and the Sea to Sky, and then up again by Britannia Beach, and then there's going to be a big stay away zone close to the plant. They don't want you anywhere near there with boats because they do have venting, they do have this big storage tanker does boil off some of its vapor all the time, and that's very flammable. This Fortis pipeline that comes up here comes all the way from Coquitlam and is going to go through Squamish. It's going to have a big compressor station along Finch, just to the west, I guess, side of Finch of the highway, in that land in there, somewhere in there, they're going to put a pretty large compressor. that they're hoping to be powered by electricity, and I'm hoping to also to see that it's powered by electricity, because otherwise you're going to be able to hear it from here. If it's powered by electricity, it will have a much lower sound level. That pipeline is going to cross the river. They're going to drill down at an angle at twice the size of the pipe, so that 48 inches, the pipe's going to be 24 inches. Yay big. They're going to drill a 48-inch hole down under the river and back up again on the other side, and then wander along the cliff face by Eagle Rock there towards Woodfibre. That's extremely challenging terrain, and they're having trouble at the moment trying to figure out how on earth they're going to do that. Okay. Woodfibre LNG is going to be supplied again by it's a 24-inch pipeline. They've upped it since I last did this. The difference between 20 and 24 doesn't sound like much, but it's about a 44% increase in the total volume. And this plant needs all the gas it can get in order to be profitable. It's hoping to be operational by 2017, if approved. It's 2.4 million tons of this LNG every year is what their license says they can produce, and it's for the Asian market. It's none of it's for us. And of course, as you will hear from Damien Gillis and Eoin Madden, it all comes from fracked sources. And in northeast BC, and there is a very odd or strange or mixed relationship between the First Nations bands there and the whole fracking industry, because it's jobs but it's also destroying the habitat, the land, and the wild species that live there, on which First Nations have died for years. So there's a very mixed emotion about that whole fracking industry in northeast BC. You'll hear more about it from Damien. This is owned by a Singapore-based company called Pacific Oil and Gas. It's a company run by an Asian billionaire called Sukanto Tanodo, and his daughter's been in town here. He's not a very nice character. Most billionaires have skeletons in their closet. This one needs several closets for them. And you can read all about it, but the company recently got fined for tax evasion in Singapore, well, in Indonesia, and actually paid the fine and pleaded guilty. So, and there are a whole pile of stories about how this is not a very nice fellow, but he's the one who's going to own this plant, and he has a very dismal environmental record on palm oil plantations in Indonesia and Sumatra, etc. You can read it for yourselves. I think there's some literature back there. The issues for you to consider are, of course, the impact on marine mammals. The orcas, if the herring indeed do not spawn, then the entire food chain degrades, and the wonderful return of orcas and dolphins and humpback whales in the Sound that are driving, that are wonderful to behold, but are also driving tourists here. You see some boats come out of Sewells every day taking tourists to show them. That's going to be impacted. Air quality, they say that by powering it with electricity, they're going to cut 80% of the emissions from the plant, but 20% of the emissions to the plant is still 120,000 tons of carbon dioxide in this confined airspace every year. And with nitrous oxide and nitrogen oxide, those are commonly called smog. And my contention is that Whistler and Squamish are turning into tourist destinations, and those tourists, if they really want to look out their window and see a smoggy horizon, they don't need to leave Beijing or Hamburg or wherever they come from. The impact on local benefits. There is an estimated 100 jobs in this. Some of those will be on land in Vancouver and possibly in Squamish. and maybe 70 or so might be employed at the plant. That's definite benefit. But it's what you're giving up to get that you have to be concerned about. There's an export license being granted to the Singapore company, and there's the start of the BC Environmental Assessment, and the public comment period started yesterday morning in the wee hours. It only lasts for 30 days. There will be a chance for a second one later on, but the earlier that you express your concern or your questions about what this will or won't do for you, or for Woodfibre or for the First Nations, now is a good time to ask those questions. If you don't get satisfactory answers, ask them again. But the offset of costs and benefits, yes, there's 100 jobs. There may be some property taxes, but the BC government has said we're going to, and your local MLA has said, we're going to cap those. We will limit the amount Squamish can charge this Woodfibre people in terms of property taxes. And those actually vary very much as to whether they put it on land or they put it in the ocean. So that property taxes on the ocean are not a local jurisdiction really at all, whereas on land it certainly is. There are some indirect service jobs of, there will be tugs berthing these vessels. There will be, since nobody will live at the plant, there'll be the ferry rides back and forth every day, and there will be some jobs for tug operators, camp cooks, etc. But most of them will be fairly specialized, and it will be up to the proponent to explain to all of you in Squamish as to how many jobs will actually be filled by people who live here, who understand the community, who are part of the community, and will this company be a good corporate citizen in this community, or is it just another resource grab that will leave you wondering, why did we take this deal? There are some fracking jobs up in East BC because this is going to export that fracked gas. Those are not very high-end jobs. They are drill rigs, people for drill rigs, or what they call in Alberta, drill pigs. And they induce kids to leave school early because they can make more money being a drill operator than they can, or driving a truck to haul water to these fracking pits. They can make more money than they can in other types of jobs that are available to them. So that's, again, the mixed emotions about it. But it is not a future I want for my kids. There's some natural gas royalties, and the government's still figuring out whether we're going to charge any at all to these industries. And it's always based currently on net profits, and I'll explain why that's important in a minute. Carbon taxes they won't pay very much of because they won't be burning any of the gas here if they power it with electricity. And you only pay carbon taxes if you burn it here. When you put it in your car, gasoline, you pay carbon taxes because you're going to burn it, but they won't. They'll just put it in a ship and float it down the Sound. The cons are there are very few employees for this industry. This is a capital-intensive industry. It keeps the number of employees to operate a plant at an absolute minimum. But it requires a lot of money to build the plant. They will probably build it in South Korea and either float in the components or float in the completed unit. It depends whether they put it on land. They'll have to assemble it here, but they won't build it here. You will have lowered property values because you have a pipeline with high pressure pipeline at 2,100 pounds per square inch, pretty high pressure, going right by your houses along Finch. And through Squamish Nation territory up the Indian River, and then along by Eagle Bluffs down into Woodfibre. You'll have light pollution. If they change to electricity as the power source, it is quite probable that they will have a permanent flare. And I'll show you an example of one from Norway in a minute as to what that looks like. So that would essentially just destroy the night view, and if you're going up the gondola, I don't think a flare from a gas plant would be particularly attractive for tourists. the little and no corporate taxes, I'll explain that in a minute. This company's based in Singapore, and if they buy the gas here, they liquefy it and ship it off. The company that ships it off is headquartered in Singapore and will pay Singapore taxes, not BC taxes. So there's very little coming back into the coffers of BC from a company like this. And as I said earlier, the company has a track record of tax evasion. So I don't expect them to behave any differently here. There is, because of the fact that it's in a big race with other countries, Australia, Qatar, Mozambique, Iraq and Iran, and some other place, US in particular, to get this to Asia because of the price difference between Asia and here for this stuff. The governments, both federal and provincial, are anxious to get this done as quickly as possible, and unfortunately are loosening the regulations that would have us do quality stuff, and to apply regulations that would make them take the time to be innovative and careful with our environment. They're not doing. It is going to be most likely a shoddy piece of work. There are risks, obviously, of pipeline rupture. I'll show you one from Manitoba last Christmas. Ship collision, terrorism. You aim a rocket-propelled grenade at one of those things out there, and all hell break loose. Who, if something bad happens, would you go after? The company's based in Singapore. The tanker crews will be registered in Marshall Islands or Panama or someplace that is only a post office box anyway. So there'll be exclusion zones for boaters, so you will have, while these things go up and down the sound, to stay away from those tankers by 1.6 kilometers. And in places, that means you have to pull your boat into shore and wait there for them to go by, and then you can proceed on your merry way. And recreational fishermen and boaters are not going to be terribly pleased with that. The public subsidies, large companies in BC pay about 4 cents per kilowatt hour, and if you've looked at your electricity bills recently, you know that you pay about 10 cents per kilowatt hour. And these things soak up an enormous amount of electrical power to liquefy the gas. And that difference amounts, in this case, to Woodfibre getting essentially a cross-subsidy between residential customers in Squamish and the rest of BC, and what they pay, a cross-subsidy amounting to about $8 million a year. You don't see it, but it's there. And you've probably all experienced the recent hikes in hydro fees, and in part it's going to pay for those. Now, historically, that's always been the deal. We give subsidies, electrical subsidies, to big companies because they employ a lot of people, and that's good. The problem here is that these companies employ this many people and absorb this much electricity. The equation doesn't seem to work anymore. And last but not least is that if we export all our gas, we have the chief geologist in Canada saying that within 7 years we're going to be a net importer. And last I did the math, we live in a cold country, we have a limited source of heating materials. We do the math, and this is not good. If we export it all, then foreigners make all the profits, and we're left with nothing to heat our houses with. And then we have to get very creative, and we may be kicking ourselves. I'll skip that. This is how big one of the tanks on one of these ships is. There are 4 or 5 of them, depending on the size of it. You see the guy? That's how big one of the tanks is. And they're filled with liquid that is at minus 160. So even a cold winter's day outside in Squamish would look like they'd arrived in this gas had arrived in the Bahamas. If it ever came in contact, it would bubble furiously and would have, as I said, eventually catch fire and would kill 50% of the people less than 3.7 kilometers away from it. This is what a typical one looks like, and the reason why the one that's here is so dangerous is that separation between storage tanker, storage facility, and the tankers that come in and out, in this case, is that they are anchored to one another. The The proposal is to put the liquefaction plant on land, I think, latest incarnation of it, but the storage, that would be floating and would have a permanent engine on it and would be the 120,000 tons. And this thing would take the 60,000 tons of it and bring it to Asia, and then another one would come in next week and take the other 60,000, but in the meantime, this liquefaction plant would fill up the tanker again. The danger thing is that you have that and that, in Woodfibre's case, anchored next to each other. And while tankers have a pretty good safety record, these things do not. The last one in Algeria that blew up killed 30 people and damaged $1 billion worth of property. And there are many instances of that. Gas pipeline explosions. This was one from Manitoba just before last Christmas. Remember the pipeline that blew up? And these people could read their books at 3 in the morning with this. It went on for 2.5 days before they could turn it off. And last but not least, if there's a flare at this facility to burn off the stuff that boils off the storage tanker, this is a picture from Hammerfest in Norway. This thing is 4 kilometers away from downtown Hammerfest, and that's what it looks like at night. The people in Hammerfest are not terribly enamored of this. We do have only one LNG plant in this entire country right now. That's in St. John's, New Brunswick. St. John, rather. And it's called Canaport, and it's an import terminal. It brings tankers in and gasifies the liquid and puts it in pipes to go all around northeast USA. But recently, 7,500 songbirds flew into its flame and died. They were just crisped. And it was a foggy night. They saw the light, flew into the flame, and by the time they could stop, 7,500 songbirds littered the floor of the plant. They're dangerous things for migrating birds. You would ask, if you go to the next Wednesday's meeting, ask about flaring. And that if there's going to be a flare, if they say, well, it might be intermittent or it might not, ask them again for a commitment that it will not be permanent. Because looking at that from the gondola is not going to be the most attractive thing. And again, remembering where all this thing comes from, this is out of focus, I'm sorry, but the fracking platform typically involves a big pool of very nasty water that's imbued with all sorts of fracking fluids, some of which are carcinogenic. A lot of stuff that comes up from underground is loaded with arsenic, loaded with a whole pile of salts that you don't want to know about. And they let it sit there. They're supposed to pump it back down again, but many of them don't. They're lined with plastic, and eventually, of course, the plastic breaks up and the water drains into the subsoil and winds up in your drinking water. And there are huge amounts of water involved in this fracking platform right here, and there are trucks permanently going back and forth to reservoirs to bring it up, to bring more and more water, because the water is what they use to pressure the gas to come out in the first place. And if that's not a problem, when they leave, because these things last about 30 months, and then 80% of their gas has been given up, so they have to move on and do this all over again, a mile over. Leaving the land, the roads, the destruction there, and there's no rules from our current government forcing them to clean up. With that, I'll stop and take any questions you have. I'm clearly not a fan of this. Everything I learn about both the industry and this particular proponent leads me to believe that I would not accept this deal. And I live in the Sound. I would greatly regret not speaking up now about something that I don't think is really going to do us any good at all. Questions? Thanks. Hans?
It's all available for anybody to read and Google it. the 300-meter ships that they are eventually going to bring in, they are 1,000 feet long with the quantities you mentioned. They're equivalent to 55 Hiroshima bombs in the destructive power. So you want to have one of those suckers around you? I don't.
Actually, I did the map, and 60,000 tons amounts to 70, but I don't think the other 69 would bother you if the first one went off. So it's kind of making the rubble bounce is what it's known as, right? Yeah, it's 70 Hiroshima-sized A-bombs in each of those things if it gets out and catches fire. So not nice to think about that. I wouldn't sleep well down in Boyer Island knowing that that thing was going within a kilometre of me. I'm not keen, oddly enough. Any others? Yeah.
In the environmental assessment that's been put out.
Could you speak up, please?
I gather that they have, well, they talk about going to electricity and so on. To what degree do we know that they will?
I guess if they put it in and the environmental assessment approves it like that, they would have to come back round and go for a reapproval. At least that's the theory. With the present government's haste to get to market, I'm not sure this theory applies. For instance, I would give you would be that Fortis originally, and have been at this for 8 months, including public hearings, talking about a 20-inch pipeline, and just yesterday they came into the hotel up there and talked about a 24-inch pipeline. Now when I spoke to the government project manager in charge, and said he didn't know anything about that change, and he hinted that it might have to be restarted, but that was 2 weeks ago, and there's been no move at all to restart it. When you change the significant component, the size of a pipe, by 44%, I would imagine that would be pretty significant. Same as if Woodfibre decides to burn gas instead of electricity, that would be pretty significant. But I don't have a huge faith based upon what I see the actions in Victoria and maybe at the district of Squamish, to interrogate, to nail these things down so that the wiggle room of doing shoddy work isn't there anymore, that if we're going to have this, let's have it in our terms that run to the highest standards of safety and environmental responsibility possible. But we're going to have to fight for it, folks.
So the same thing is true with their theoretical movement on the land. One doesn't trust that either.
I believe that the theoretical movement from land is not the fact that we think that it would be nicer environmentally to do that. I think that's probably because, and some of the people here would know, there is a very shaky, that place at Woodfibre is a very deep cliff or slope. And the slope is this outwash sediment from the Squamish River. It's basically unstable sand. And ever so often it slumps. And in 1955, I wasn't here then, the whole pier at Squamish basically disappeared into the deep, and taking with it an on-land warehouse. Sorry, at Woodfibre, yeah. And so anchoring about 600,000 tons of liquefaction plant, storage carrier, and the transiting Asian carrier to a shaky pier was going to be always problematic. And I think after some look at it by engineers, they decided, well, that was even too much risk for them. So they basically said, okay, we'll put it on land. It's more expensive for them, as is the pipeline construction more expensive, because that is a very steep slope above the Eagle Bluffs there, and they're going to have to build. They say they're going to have to build a gondola to bring the pipe and the people up there, because there's no other way by helicopter, or there's no road over there. People who've hiked along the transmission line know that that's pretty steep. So there's going to be, it's a huge job, and they have to compete for the companies who are specialists in doing it, with the likes of Kitimat and Prince Rupert projects, who are much bigger and much juicier for these pipeline companies. They're going to have to blast where they hit solid rock to put the pipe at least 1 meter down and at least 3 meters away from the existing pipe, and that is very problematic in some places. So it's a real headache for Fortis to put the pipe to the plant, and then you get into the plant mechanics, and there are lots of headaches there too, not least of which is the shaky pier. Yeah.
Yeah, just want to tell the people from Squamish here that it's their must to Google San Bruno, California, 2010. A pipeline exploded down there, killed 5 people, and they have no numbers of how many got burned. 38 houses destroyed, and the pipeline was burning for 90 minutes before they could turn it off. I've been now fighting with Fortis to give me the facts on the pipeline shutoffs in town. They have not come forward. I have to go to BCUC, I go to the Oil and Gas Commission, and it's absolutely appalling that they cannot make a simple statement where they are. Not that I want to know where they are, I want to know that they are, and that they are automatically triggered, that if something would happen, we're in an earthquake zone here, that shuts off from both sides, because even if you shut the pipeline from the east side, you could have back pressure from Whistler and from Woodfibre. So it is absolutely important for us to know what we're dealing with. And that's a small pipeline now. If they go 3 times the pipeline afterwards on top of it, I want to see that in trench, that this is absolutely looked after with the reports, yearly testing and the whole works. This is appalling because the oil and gas, they have absolutely no mandate to actually deal with the regulations the way they should be. And they get to the point where they tell me, you have to go ask Fortis for this information. I was fighting just to get the number for the pipeline that is going through. It's a 4880 number, that I even got some information. And the problem is, as far as I'm concerned, it's like giving the wolf the key to the chicken coop or the whatever. You know, it is totally unacceptable. And there is no records from them that they can give you, say, we tested on such and such a date, it shuts down within 50 pounds less pressure or whatever. It's an appalling situation. I'm in the technical field and mainly involved in safety. I've never seen anything like it. I was brought in here to open up the Whistler. I trained the people. I had to sign my name to it that we tested the safety brakes, etc. And that is recorded in Vancouver. I could go and check my signature there still today. And today I still haven't got a report that is happening with gas. I'm totally appalled.
All I'd say is, Hans, I did have a discussion with 2 of the engineers yesterday from Fortis, and I know that there is a shut-off valve on pretty close to town on the Indian River side of town, and there is another one going to be at the compressor, and there is one going to be on the far side of the river as well. That's the theory. I think you would want to verify that is indeed the case when you get the diagrams. Yeah.
I have to first say that I agree with you in all the compelling reasons why we shouldn't have an LNG plant. But from my perspective, and I've worked in the finance community and the finance industry, and if you sit in the boardrooms and you sit in the investor presentations, there are lots of compelling reasons why this should continue to go ahead, and lots of investor support from Bay Street and so on. So money talks in this world. How do we talk louder, and how do we stop something like this from going ahead? And I brought my daughters here because I'd like the next generation to also learn and try to contribute to this too.
Stay informed, ask lots of questions, and keep asking them until you get answers that make sense to you and are satisfactory to you. We seem to have a deficit that we elect public officials who are supposed to keep their eyes open and their ears open and inform the public. We seem to have reversed that process, whereby We have people like me who have taken it upon themselves to do the research that we elect our public officials to do, and to do the business like I am tonight, informing you of there are risks associated with this that you might want to weigh before you think about, well, would 100 jobs satisfy me? Would 100 jobs equate to losing the herring, the orcas, the dolphins, and would, anyhow, those are values those are things that test the real values of a community. And this is going to be a test for you. Those of you who have children, you would have to remember them in that, will the community be better if this is built, or will it not? I make that judgment fairly quickly, but I've looked at this a lot. You will have to make your own judgment about that.
So what can we recommend people do, like the next generation, the kids, like people in the community? What else can we do to try to stop something like this?
Teach them. We have to get off fossil fuels sooner or later. Anyway, so why not sooner? Because it's damaging our climate. I just got my insurance bill and it went up, and they said, right in the heading, they said, because of climate change, your insurance bill is gone up. And I go, okay, I didn't buy into that climate change. I can't do a whole pile to stop it, but I want to. And influencing your politicians who make these decisions, and the BC government has made its decision that, and announced in the last election, and you elected a Liberal MLA, who announced that this industry is going to generate 75,000 jobs and make BC, which currently has a deficit of about $70 billion, debt-free. I have looked at this 6 ways from Sunday, and I can't see any justification for making either of those claims. So you have to ask and pick apart. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of trouble, but your future generations depend on you to do that. My children have looked at me and said, you have the time, you have the brains, you have the education to go and challenge these, off you go.
Actually, I just want to answer that question. I think one thing that's really wonderful is when the public stops giving or requires that companies have social license to operate. So showing up at meetings and asking questions is very effective, and we're seeing that in Prince Rupert as well. The companies that aren't listening to the local citizens are facing more challenges than the ones where the companies are operating. So just bringing your daughters and going to the Fortis meetings and letting them know that it's ordinary people who are concerned about their project is really good.
And I'll give you some comfort. The financial industry is looking at a plant of this size, facing that much competition from Russia, who just did a big deal with China, and looking at the fact that the market in Japan is going away because they're going to switch those 55 nuclear reactors back on, and seeing that Korea Gas is a partner in the one in Prince Rupert, so it'll be its own customer for that. And what's left of a market in Taiwan, the Australians will soak up. The chances that this plant is going to get built and financed by those financiers is pretty small to begin with. You just have to tip it over the edge, that's all.
Eoin, could I just make a very quick comment and answer? Is I think that enough of us have a vision, or we have a sense of innovation. We should be looking at that piece of property and seeing what are all the other possibilities and options that could be done in its stead. And then do a comparison of positive actions, positive projects, and compare them with this very dangerous one that the district in particular, and the Premier and the federal government want to push. But you've come up with some ideas, I've come up with ideas, I know others have come up with ideas, and what we should be doing is having a brainstorming session and say, okay, let's see what we can do as alternatives, which will produce something that is visionary progressive and not dangerous?
Finding the solutions is definitely a very important thing, and that's something that My Sea to Sky is working on as well. And Theo is part of My Sea to Sky. As far as what the youth can do today, the youth need to vote. And we also all need to vote. And we all need to write to our politicians and let them know that we are watching them, let them know that they are meant to represent us, not corporations. And write to them repeatedly, like we need to engage, like call up Jordan Sturdy and arrange to have a meeting with him. Tell him what your views are. The oil and gas industry and all of these industries that want to do all this stuff meet with our representatives all the time. They're very good at lobbying our government, and that is why they end up getting their way, because the general public doesn't interact with our government. So we need to be more proactive, and we need to definitely make our voices heard and let our government representatives know that we expect them to represent us. And I'm just going to take a few more questions and we're going to start wrapping things up. Carolyn's had her hand up for a long time.
Yeah, in the beginning you were suggesting that there's a 30-day period for us to offer input. Can you elaborate on that and how we can share?
Right, so just last week the documents came out on June 5th, but yesterday the public comment period started. So this document is called a valued component selection document. It's the very first official part of the process when we can first give public feedback to the Environmental Assessment Office. So I actually don't know, do you have my presentation on your computer still? Let's just do a quick raise of hands. I have like a 10-minute presentation which explains the environmental assessment process. Does everybody want to see that right now? Sure. Raise of hands, yes? Raise of hands, no? No? Okay, so let's just boot that up. So while Owen's setting this up for me, I'll try to explain it off the top of my head. What is the most important thing to give feedback on for the next 30 days is what is valuable to you. So what are the values that the proponents need to be studying, and then what are the things that they need to study to actually evaluate those possible impacts. So I'm going to go through this really quickly. For those of you that are leaving, please do make sure to sign up for our mailing list or buy a t-shirt or throw some money in the donation box. So an environmental assessment is a decision-making tool. It aims to identify and evaluate the potential impacts of a project. So it's required by Canadian law. 2 different laws, there's a federal version and then a BC version. Right now, this project is going through the BC environmental assessment process, but it is also dovetailed slightly with the federal option. So it's a little complicated in how it's been set up. So first off, the project is announced. And the first thing that needs to happen is they need to decide whether it needs an environmental assessment or not. So if it does, the Environmental Assessment Office sets up a working group. Now this group is composed of local and regional and federal government. It's composed of First Nations, and it's composed of various government agencies. So what's really interesting in the Woodfibre LNG working group is you can see there's a whole heap of different government agencies and regulatory bodies. There's a couple of regional districts in there. There's a couple of First Nations representatives in there too, like Squamish Nation and another First Nation. The interesting thing with this is that the only community that is actually part of this working group is Squamish. So the people that are missing from this list include all of the other communities in Howe Sound that will be impacted by this project, from Britannia Beach, all of the islands, the Sunshine Coast, Whistler, which is going to be potentially impacted by air pollution, and West Vancouver, which would also be impacted by air pollution, not to mention the Islands Trust and Gambier Islands Local Trust Committee. So the stage that we're at right now is the scoping stage, or figuring out what matters. So this is this very first section that we're going to be looking at. So the environmental assessment process has 5 pillars, or 5 different values essentially that they have to look at, and things that they have to study. So this is like the environment. They have to look at economic impacts, social impacts, heritage impacts, and health impacts. So what happens now is, to be able to study the impacts to each of those 5 pillars, we need to identify what our values are. So what is important within each of those pillars: the environment, economy, social, heritage, and health. So normally what happens at this stage is that we get quite a large document, about 100 and something pages, called the Draft Application Information Requirements. This time round, they have substituted that for something else called the Valued Component Selection Document. This is a much smaller document, but one of the problems is that we don't get all of the information. So right now we're trying to push the Environmental Assessment Office to actually release the draft AIR, as well as it's called, and so that we can see all of that, because they're not letting us look at that. And we also want to have another public input process on that. So as we're going through and we're deciding what our values are, and it doesn't matter whether you support LNG or you're against LNG, everybody needs to get involved in this. It's what do we value here? What is of importance to us here in Squamish and in Howe Sound and in all these other communities, in the First Nations? Like what is important to us? So the way the pillars is set up, it tries to pigeonhole everything. So like separate everything out. So if you're just looking at an economic value, that's all it is. If you're just looking at an environmental value, that's all it is. But that's not really how it works. Because, for example, if employment is a value component, if that is something that we value, is to have access to good quality, high-paying jobs, that kind of thing, it's actually falls across several different pillars. So the economic pillar, the social pillar, and also the health pillar. So you can't really separate things out this way, and it makes it quite a complicated process. So this is really, when you're looking at the pillars and you're looking at the values, everything's just sort of across all of those pillars, really. It's going to depend on what those values are. So, as I said, this is figuring out what happens. The documents were just released on June 5th. They're available on the Environmental Assessment website. We are going to be pulling together a citizens working group to try to review these and to pull together information and to highlight what is missing. And we're going to be trying to facilitate the process so that public can engage. So the public comment period just started yesterday. It ends on July 11th. This is not really long enough, given that it's the end of the school term, school vacations just starting. We've asked the Environmental Assessment Office repeatedly for an extension, and that has been denied. It's something that would be useful if all of you could also email the Environmental Assessment Office and ask for an extension and say that this is not a long enough period to be able to engage the public in this process. So that's the first thing you can do. As I mentioned, there's all of these open houses happening next week, and I'm going to be attending all of them. I'm actually taking several weeks off work so that I can help to facilitate this process and to review what's going on and to try to help the general public engage. So there's open houses and small group meetings on Monday and Wednesday during the day, and then from 5 to 8 p.m. as well in the evenings. The most important one to go to is this meeting. And as I was saying before, that's because this is the only official BC Environmental Assessment Office led meeting. So please make sure you go to that. They need to see as many people coming out as possible. They need to know how concerned the community is. So make sure you put that on your calendar. That's next week, June 18th, from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the Executive Suites Hotel. So for this part of the input, what we need to focus on what are the issues that need to be included in the assessment? What needs to be studied? Do we need to have a study that is a year-long study on potential noise impacts in the sound? This is something that we need to say, that we need this study to be done. We want to research how that would impact the herring or the dolphins or the whales and everything else, right? So we're trying to pull together all of the information that we think needs to be studied, and then we're going to share that with you. So again, please sign up for the mailing list for My Sea to Sky. We'll be sending out that information hopefully in a couple of weeks as the Citizens Working Group kicks in a high gear. So if anybody does have expertise in any of these areas, or if you know an LNG expert or anything like, we're reaching out to experts that can definitely help us identify the gaps from what has been drafted and to make sure that we're ticking all the boxes in what needs to be studied and letting them know how important these things are.
Can I ask you, do you include like elders within your citizens working group?
We include anybody that wants to join us.
It's really important, especially people who have lived here the longest.
Yeah.
And just have them and their stories, and I think it's important that we do that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that would be fantastic. I mean, to even hear the stories of what the sound used to be like before industry. And actually for part of that too, I'd really invite you to come out on June 29th to the potluck that we're having at Nexon Beach. Just to have that opportunity to capture those stories on film would be really phenomenal. Yeah. Was there another question?
It seems to me, I guess we all have pretty well these attitudes, but the LNG people have only the economic attitudes, and I've mentioned before, you've got to speak to them in their own language, which is economics.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to put down, there's this other thing, a business person in Squamish told me that there are Chinese going around, there's a Chinese going around trying to buy up all the businesses in Squamish and have the present owner rent it from them and run it for them and pay rent to them. Now, I don't know whether this will have any impact on the influence of the Chinese.
Yeah, and I can't speak to that.
But I feel that our groups, that beauty and heritage and that don't seem to count with the bean counters.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to talk in their language and bring up good arguments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the economic argument is definitely one that we've been tackling, and obviously Owen's been doing a really good job with that, with the tax story and how this is actually not going to be of benefit to Squamish. So I'm just going to continue with the whole environmental assessment process. So after we tell them what they need to study, the proponent takes that back and they finalize what the value components are going to be. So they study the potential impacts of the project. After however long that takes, they submit the project or the study to the Environmental Assessment Office. The Environmental Assessment Office looks whether it's complete, like, have you guys done a good job? If they haven't, they send it back to them and say, no, actually, you guys haven't done a very good job, keep on going. But if they say that, yes, it's complete, then that is when we get the second phase of public input. So right now we're in the pre-application phase. I should have mentioned that before. So all of this is pre-application. So once they submit all of the studies that have been done, that's when we enter the application phase, or application review phase. So the government, stakeholders and First Nations review and scrutinize the study. We have a second public comment period of 45 to 60 days, and the Environmental Assessment Office has 180 days to complete the review and to submit an assessment report. So that report goes to the people that make decisions, which is the Provincial Environment Minister, the Federal Environment Minister, and the Provincial and Federal Cabinets. And they are the people that review, and then they either approve or reject the project. So there's a few different ways this can go from there, and I haven't looked at them all or included them all, but one thing they could go and say is that the project's not approved, you guys need to do more studies, so that's when it goes back to step 4 and the proponent has to go back into that study phase. So this is what's happening with Garibaldi at Squamish right now. They keep on submitting stuff, they keep on saying, no, actually you guys need to do more studies, so then it keeps on going back to that step, so they do the studies and then submit it again, and then it just keeps on going in that loop, right? So the other thing they can say is that the project cannot proceed. If they approve it, they could approve it with conditions, like, so it's approved provided that you do X, Y, and Z. So then it proceeds to permitting. And there's all these different agencies that are involved in permitting for this project, or that will be involved in permitting for this project. For example, the BC Oil and Gas Commission, Transport Canada, the BC Safety Authority, you know, the list goes on. There's a lot, like a really huge list of regulatory bodies. So they'll be issuing permits and all that kind of fun stuff. And then after that, there'll be continual monitoring, and that will most likely be done by the BC Oil and Gas Commission, and then a whole list of those other regulatory bodies, again, just making sure that they're doing everything that they're meant to be doing. So that's the whole process. People were asking what they can do to get involved. So again, like My Sea to Sky, like Future of Howe Sound, it's another organization that's doing some great stuff and trying to call for protecting the Howe Sound. Like us on Facebook and invite your friends to like us as well. Sign up for our newsletters. We will be trying to help people engage with this process and work within this process. Attend public meetings next week. It's really important that you get out, especially that Wednesday night one. Write to the BC Environmental Assessment Office during public consultation, and again, we're going to be trying to facilitate that, make that easy for you. Write to council. Talk to council, write to Jordan Sturdy, talk to Jordan Sturdy, like set up meetings with them, set up meetings with other BC ministers as well. Like they need to start hearing from us. Write a letter to the editor in your local newspaper. Talk to your friends and neighbours about what you've learned this evening. Volunteer if you have a few hours a week or a month or whatever you can do. Like we're always looking for people to help out. And donate. There's a lot of expenses involved with like renting spaces or organizing events or printing information materials. We want to print information materials to distribute all around Squamish, so anything that you can give is very much appreciated. We're setting up a lot of information on our website too. It's myseatosky.org, and hopefully going to be having this information up here. Owen's talk from Tuesday night is posted on there in video format. If you want to share that with people, please do. I gave this talk on Tuesday as well. We're going to have a video version of it as well. So you can share that with people as well to explain how this process works. Caroline?
Well, just, I guess I'm looking for an email and telephone number so I can, if I can't be there on the 18th, how can I easily get those contacts so that we can do it?
I'll try and put that up on the website tomorrow. I'm in like full-on like panic mode. We all are right now. So just this part of the problem with the environmental assessment process is that you don't get any heads up that it's coming. You get, so long as you are looking at the website all the time, you get notified that, oh, actually they've released the documents, and oh, we have a week until the public comment period kicks in. So we're just like reacting right now. So we're going to try to have that information up really soon.
Say a couple of words, just in the last moment here. Tracey has nailed the environmental process right on the nail head. I've been working for about the last 10 or 15 years in the BC environmental process, and the one thing that you can do during the comment period is to make comments that actually request work to be done. Because the game is to delay this project until their burn rate takes over from what they have in their pocket. And if they have 100 employees, they're probably burning 100 million. I mean, they're probably burning, what's 100 times 100,000, like they're probably burning $10 million a year, so just on salaries plus other expenses. So your comments have to be focused. Your comments actually have to ask them to do something. You can't complain. Complaints get you nowhere. You actually have to ask them to do something, and preferably something, as you suggested, that takes a year of baseline studying. That will stop them in the water for a year. Like, your comments should focus on seasonality, because they can't do anything about the seasons. They have to actually span the entire year to do a study like that. So studies on how birds nest during the year, studies on how herring spawn, like when the mud skippers are around. Those sorts of things are the most effective things to comment on. And if anyone wants to discuss how to actually put sand in the gears, just come and talk to me afterwards.
Thank you. I'll be talking to you too. Caddy, you have a question?
Yeah, for Eoin. With the open houses and the small group meetings, you said earlier we should ask about flaring. What are the key questions we should be asking and demanding answers on in those meetings? And even if we know the answers, maybe some of us know the answers already, I found in the last meetings asking those questions actually got other people the answers or not the answers they wanted. So what would be key things you would ask?
Well, there's a whole pile of things. I mean, ranging all the way from the economic. I mean, simple things like, tell me about all these jobs. Break down the 100 for me. How many are going to be filled by locals? How many are going to be imported? What skills do they have to have, and how are we going to get them? Are you going to train us? Or do we have to go acquire those and hope the job will be still there by the time we get back? I mean, basic stuff. You don't have to get scientific about this. Just ask them basic stuff about, tell me the impacts. Am I going to be looking at a flare at night? That's a perfectly valid question. And if you don't get an answer, then mark it down to put a notice on that, a comment going, I asked them A, B, C, D, and I got rubbish for an answer. So I'm not going to be happy until I get decent stuff for an answer. Or, so jobs, taxes, are they going to pay taxes in Canada? If so, how much? I was at a meeting of the Squamish Lillooet Regional District, and Mo Freitag asked Bing Giroux, the general manager, question, so how much are you going to pay the district of Squamish for property taxes? And he went, it might be a little and it might be a lot, literally is what he said. And Mo persisted and said, you must have put some number in your business plan, you put some number, tell me what the number you put in there for was. And he refused to answer. I mean, little stuff like that, it matters. You're all Squamish ratepayers, and it matters how much they pay as to how little you pay. So ask them. And if you don't get an answer, then ask again, or go down to your mayor and ask if you have the answer, Mr. Mayor, then, or Mr. Councillor, then tell me. I'd like to know how much they're paying, because there's 200 acres over there. So ask about taxes, ask about flaring, ask about jobs, ask about how many tankers, how often, how far am I going to stay away, what's the risk involved in this thing in terms of an explosion or a collision, how much is it going to affect the boating traffic, how much smog is there going to be from this plant, and how will that affect Whistler and Squamish's tourism industry.
Ask them what they're going to do about things, like all those things that Eoin said, because they actually have to respond. Every comment that we make publicly goes into what they call a tracking table, and the EAO goes and compares the responses of the proponent to what your question is, and if there isn't a satisfactory answer, it goes back.
I just want to follow up on that thought, because the only way that I get answers from, especially from the gas company, is if they don't answer, I take exactly the same text and send it to the BCUC, British Columbia Utilities Commission, and say, why do I not get an answer? And you'd be surprised how quick you get the answer. At one point, I asked for that number, it took forever. I sent the letter up, email up in the morning. In the evening, the Fortis people thought, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to give you the number, here is the number. I know exactly how they were pushed from the British Columbia Utility Commission. So anybody that has a question specifically about gas and they don't get an answer, take up the email and send it to the BCUC and tell them why you don't get the answer, and you will see there will be immediately an answer.
Yeah, I mean, and like you heard tonight, ask for a baseline study of the herring population in Northern Howe Sound over a period of at least one whole year to cover all the seasons as a baseline study, and then and only then will you be happy that you might know the answers to how badly affected it will be by this thing humming away in the water like a great big drum. So you've learned some of the things here, the air quality, the effect on marine life, the flaring, the boat traffic, the hazards, the pipeline hazard, and keep asking them till you get a satisfactory answer.
Just a really brief comment. When I started getting involved in environmental stuff about 2000, I found out that so few people write letters, and probably snail mail letters are more effective than emails, that one letter at that time, in 2000, was considered to be the opinion of 300 people. Letters matter, especially letters. They can't just delete an email. If they have a letter to hold in their hand, it has a real impact.
Any other questions? Okay. For everybody that stuck around, thank you so much. I'd like to again thank the Brackendale Art Gallery for hosting us here. It was so appreciated. I'd like to thank Paul for filming everything tonight. We're going to be posting this online, and that is so important as well. So you can share anything tonight that you've learned with your friends once we've got that link up on our website. And again, I'd like to thank our events team for organising these events and for organising all the upcoming events. They're doing such a fantastic job. And finally, again, I'd like to thank Eoin, and I'd like to thank Kathy Heise. Thank you so much for coming out today to speak to us.